I would say the big thing for me is being able to trust the people that are around. How does he feel about the swatting trend that was happening a few years ago? But insisted that I stay for hors d'oeuvres and wine, not only during my service, but wanted me to return later on in the day to have a dinner date.
Hello everybody and welcome back to Shift Fire. It's good to see you folks. Today we're going to do an episode of Interrogating with Cam and Izzy. I am the aforementioned Izzy, Israel Wright, former Green Beret. With me is
the latter, Cameron Pfaff, former Army Ranger, and we have a special guest with us today, Mike Levy, also known as Knockout Lights on social media. If you have any sort of idea what goes on in the firearm influencer community, you know who this guy is, Assault Dynamics. Mike, thanks for joining us, man. For those viewers that don't know about you, why don't you explain a little bit about your background?
Former law enforcement, retired last year, SWAT guy for just under 14 years. Now I'm pretty much a full-time instructor, teach law enforcement and civilians performance-based training with a firearm. And I'm just glad to be here with you guys.
So Mike, you say you're a full-time instructor now. Tell us a little bit about your class.
So I really offer two types of classes. We have a post-law enforcement instructor class, which basically caters to officers who want to become instructors for the departments. They come through our post-based classes. And then my civilian firearms classes, which also include law enforcement too, are more performance-based. Handgun workshop, combat essentials, we do low light, we do RDS, which focuses on red dot optics. Those classes usually are held a couple times a month on the weekends, so people can make it out. Yeah, I really enjoy helping people improve their overall performance, diagnose deficiencies with their firearms handling and firearms skill, and it's been a very rewarding job.
Well, that's awesome, man. Yeah, I can't harp enough that training's out there and it's a necessity, it's a perishable skill, and you can never have too much training.
And Mike, where can people sign up for classes online?
Well, I do have a webpage, assaultdynamics.com, but I do post all my classes to my social media pages, Knockout Lights for Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, and also have a profile under Assault Dynamics as well. That's the best place to go look.
All right, well, you guys ready to answer some questions?
Yes.
All right, be prepared. Usually there's poop involved. So we're gonna start answering some questions. We sourced these questions from our fan base. We told them previously we're gonna be working with a law enforcement because typically they've just gotten our military background, or at least our military stories. So they might be a little tailored to you. You ready?
I'm ready. Should I be scared?
Probably, it'd be, yeah, I would.
More so amused, I think, probably here in a couple seconds. You get the first one, man. Go for it.
All right, this is from Nilo Mascara Pazzo. What is your most awesome cop story? It's not all the scary, violent stuff that is most impactful. It's probably helping people. The compassionate side of law enforcement where you make a connection with somebody, something meaningful. And one thing sticks out. There was a suicidal subject, a female, and she was very agitated, and we approached her and she attempted to disable us. We were able to calm her down, talk her down, and sometimes we treat violent acts with violence when compassion can go a long way. So that was one of the circumstances that stuck out in my brain. Just resolving something with our words and not with our hands or our tools.
Right on, man. That's awesome to me,
Yeah,
dude.
that's great, Mike. That's a really good story. Very, very important. All right, this is an interesting one. Joshua Johnson wants to know, if you could choose one weapon to carry with you, what would it be? For example, in a raid or something like that.
I think that the last part of that question really defines it for me.
Oh.
Because if we were talking just home defense or something like that, I would have a different answer. But my rifle is probably my most useful tool, and that's chambered in 5.56 or 223. So a rifle would be my primary go-to weapon for everything tactical, if you will.
What about you, Izzy? This
Me?
is no for mine.
Oh, okay,
man.
all right. Well, let's see. Now, you're right. The situation does determine what kind of weapon you would be carrying. People ask me what my favorite weapon is. The M4 that I carried when I was in 2008, 2009 time period was, you just get so used to it, and so an AR equivalent, any kind of AR style rifle is something I really feel very comfortable with, so I'd use that for home defense, I'd use that for hunting, I'd use that for out on the range, anything,
It's very interesting because when they say raid, my range brain starts working and I'm like, okay, well, there's numerous components to raid. You have blocking positions, you have isolation, you have primary, secondary. So it's like, who am I? What team am I orienting? You know, am I going internal first? Am I running a BP? And that's going to dictate the weapon. I'll go from a weapons background just because I'll be like, okay, I'll be on a BP, Mark 48 on bipod with a couple of ABs, aka ammo bitches, holding all my rounds for me and just letting loose. That would be bang, 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 Cameron's pick. So
Yeah, the raid word really creates more of a specific use, right?
Yes.
And more of a team environment, I'm thinking. But for just general home defense, if you think about it, an AR requires 2 hands.
yes,
Can't grab my keys, or it's difficult. I'm off gun if I grab my keys, if I open the door. So for me, if it was a home defense situation, a handgun gives me a free hand. I'm still up, negotiating my environment with my gun hand and a free hand.
yeah. Not to mention most modern weapons now, as far as handguns, you can mount lights, you can mount lasers, you can mount red dots. So you have everything in one package. All right. This question comes from Nicholas, quote unquote, Big Gun 2 story. And Nicholas wants to know, what was the most difficult decision you had to make in your time being a SWAT officer?
I think what becomes most difficult in a team environment is knowing your place, knowing when you have something to offer as far as advice, particularly for me where I had a high level of firearms proficiency skill, is being able to find the time, the place, and the right environment to educate your fellow teammates. It is very difficult for individuals in a team when you're not in a role of authority to make meaningful changes or suggestions. So I would say that was probably the toughest thing, is introducing some more progressive concepts into our team environment, also being on the team.
Yes.
It's just not received that well.
Yeah, you got to know how to read the room. You got to know the personalities of the people you're dealing with, and then how to present that in a tactful way or the appropriate way, depending on who you're talking to.
Let me give you an example. A newer clearing procedure that I learned from very high-end operators, military operators. Some new clearing procedures. SWAT teams can be behind the times when it comes to CQB. I introduced some of these new methodologies to clearing, and it was met with a generous amount of resistance. It wasn't until a year later, when a number of them went to an updated SWAT school, that those things were introduced to them. And now all of a sudden, we're switching our SOP on room entries.
Yeah.
Well, I said, that's a lot like what I talked about a year ago, right? Well, yeah, it is. So sometimes it takes more than one to jump on the bandwagon in order to elicit some kind of change. This is from Island Hermit. If you could go back in time and speak to yourself as a rookie SWAT officer, what advice would you give yourself?
Damn, with the questions, people.
Good people, solid folks.
These are solid questions.
Yeah.
Keep my mouth shut. Simple as that.
All right, I'll read this one out. Steve S. wants to know, looking back on any firefights, what was the closest call or the most intense moment of a firefight that you can remember?
Well, fortunately, we've mitigated many of those circumstances by prudent tactics. We didn't get into a lot of firefights on the SWAT team. It's not that it can't happen, it's just we mitigated those through our actions. One interesting example where we actually delivered some ferret rounds, which is a 40 millimeter projectile that we delivered in the second story with gas. That was probably the closest we got to start shooting back at a subject. But as far as firefights, they were few and far between for us in SWAT teams. Lots of combative subjects, but the firefights were just not a general, consideration for it. They just didn't happen that often.
Yeah, so even on a SWAT team, you have like levels of escalation of force that you go to before you kind of let things get to that high end.
Well, we have to. I mean, there's people that will shoot.
Yeah.
It does not necessarily mean that we're going to shoot back. Really, most of the standard SOP for SWAT teams now is surround and call out. Unless there is exigency meaning active shooter, exigency meaning hostage rescue. Most of our interactions in a CQB environment are containment, inner and outer perimeter, and then we begin to import less lethal forms into the equation in an attempt to de-escalate things rather than escalate it. The last thing we want to do is shoot people. We don't really want to get shot at. But if we can incorporate aspects of less lethal into that environment, we could hopefully resolve the situation without anyone getting shot.
Absolutely.
Or harmed.
Military and LE are completely different
Completely.
mindsets.
Yep.
Different mindsets,
Yep.
man. All right, next question. Machine Jammer wants to know, is slow is smooth, smooth is fast still applicable in this modern era? That's an easy one, man.
I absolutely hate that terminology to describe everything we do. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. We use that all the time, right?
Yep.
Well, I will tell you, slow is generally just slow. Fast is generally just fast. However, where people are confused is what that term really applies to. Slow and methodical movement is not what we're after. What we're after is in a team environment where we're performing CQB, is that the team is moving at a pace that we're not leaving the rest of them behind. So slow is smooth, smooth is fast is really about CQB movement in a team environment. It's not about shooting, but a lot of people want to, use that as a shooting example.
Yeah, I would say it's more fluidity.
Bang, 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 bang.
Gun goes cold.
That was better. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast.
So maintaining, you're not moving slow because slow equals death. So, but you're moving at a level, just like you're saying, that is extremely congruent and extremely fluid, that there is no breaks. There's, it's kind of like watching a river running. There's no stops. It's moving fast, but it's moving fluid.
And both of you come from a team background, so you can relate to the fact if number one or number two just takes off running and you leave the rest of the team behind, who's clearing your corners?
Mm-hmm.
Who's watching their sectors? Where's your security? So if you're not moving cohesively as a team, using that terminology, you're actually compromising your own personal security because the rest of the team can't come in and help you. So this is from Christian and Plastique. I would imagine that's how you say that word.
Plastic Mike? Yeah.
Plastic.
Yeah.
Oh, Plastic Mark II.
Plastique. Have you ever been called out to a streamer's YouTube house after a false report made on them? If so, how did you deal with the aftermath of the situation? And question two how does he feel about the swatting trend that was happening a few years ago? They are a little different. That's not a SWAT call out. I mean, someone making disparaging remarks against somebody, at least addressing the first question, that's more for detectives or patrol level. SWAT wouldn't be a component of that.
Well, are you familiar with what swatting is?
Yes, I know. Well, I haven't answered the second question.
Okay, all right.
I'm not. Please.
So go ahead and explain swatting. I think I have an understanding.
Swatting is something that has happened in the live streaming community where a person who doesn't like the certain streamer or YouTuber who's live streaming will actually call in something like a live fire threat, a bomb threat or something, and call them to the streamer's house while they're live streaming. And the police have come in and busted up because they want to see that person, that streamer, get in trouble with the police like right there live on stream. It's very dangerous because they'll call in like these really dangerous situations and the police are coming in there, they think something's going on, it's just a guy streaming. And so it's this really, I think it's just probably one of the most horrible trends in the modern day internet.
I can't say that we've ever had a circumstance that I recall where that was the case. And that's partly because of our SOP on SWAT team deployment. So our team did not self-deploy. It had to be initiated by the command staff. So the exigency of the situation had to be such that patrol, low-line patrol, or just any patrol could not handle the call, and then we were called out to mitigate that. There was circumstances, though, where we were called out and there was nothing there, which makes us extremely suspect that that call was diversionary. So we're going here and something's happening over there. So it's not exactly the same thing as swatting, but I think a team like SEB, who is a self-deploying full-time SWAT team, may have cases where they'll get a hot call and decide to deploy because their deployments are independent of their own dispatch or their own, without administration. They could have actually been subject to that.
Well, stick to TikTok dances, weirdos. That's not a cool trend.
All right, we got a couple left here. I'm gonna do this one. Decipher. Oh, like deciphering. I get it. It's just spelled wrong. What makes a good SWAT officer in your view?
Good question. I mean, the first thing that pops into my brain is you got to be able to work in a team. You've got to be able to function in a team environment, understand that you have a place, you have a responsibility, and that people are trusting you to manage your sectors of responsibility. If there's a breakdown in the team, the whole team pays the price. Trust is a super important component. Friendship, camaraderie, the ability to be physically fit to do the job. You know, we're in kit, you guys can relate. For 16-hour deployment, you guys probably wore it a lot longer than I did. At least I get to go home.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got to be able just to sustain yourself with all that gear and equipment on. I would say the big thing for me is being able to trust the people that are around. People matter. You know, the quality of people that are part of the team matter.
Not to mention the SWAT team, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's an elevated position, right? It takes a specific skill set and a number of years to even get in that position. So, you know, comparing it to like, you know, a soldier coming out of basic training, arriving to a unit fresh, and they're kind of in that robot, tell me what to do mindset. Does that not happen on the SWAT team? Because everybody's elevated. They know what they need to do, and it's a more of a cohesive unit.
It certainly is a specialized assignment that requires specialized training, and then there's also a requirement that we train more frequently than normal patrols. So typically, any specialized team within a law enforcement agency has an elevated amount of training. So, I mean, that's what it boils down to. Just, you know, much like what you guys did in the military, you were moved to a position that required something specific for your MOS, and you were able to execute at a higher level than just the normal enlisted personnel. Same thing for in law enforcement.
A lot of those principles you're talking about are applicable to my unit and Cameron's unit. It's interesting to see the parallels.
You know, someone mentioned to me one time before, I mean, fighting is fighting, combat is combat. Whether it's happening domestically or overseas, there's just different rules of engagement and different SOPs to resolve the problem. But, you know, we're still fighting bad guys.
All right, got 2 more here nearing the end. All right, Retro Splash wants to know, what was the most confusing layout in a house you've ever breached?
So what we have in the town that I worked is a lot of add-ons. So we have rooms converted into living spaces, garages, add-ons. Who knows what they're made out of? Preferably wood, or I would assume wood. But we get into these structures, and they were almost like hidden compartments. And the angles that these rooms were made were not particularly intuitive to clearing a home.
Yeah.
So a lot of times, I'm not sure about your deployments, but we may have a layout on a pre-planned deployment of what that structure looks like. And we get in there, and they've done so many modifications to the dwelling, it doesn't look anything like the plan that we initially established, which just goes to show you that all plans get screwed up.
Get thrown out the window, yeah. Plans are great until you hit the ground.
Yeah, that's true.
Pretty much.
4 walls, and you're like, okay, it must be a modern building, and then they add a hallway. Then they add, you know, multiple turns, or one room is a circle. There's a reason we do constant repetition on close quarter battle, because you rely on the fundamentals, you rely on the principles, and as long as you practice those and you maintain security long and far and someone on the door, you know, you can pretty much get through any scenario.
Yep, but we can all relate to angles and structures that present substantial challenges.
Absolutely.
Require more bodies, more eyes, and those are just a little bit more challenging to work through.
There you go, Israel. Last question for you.
Last one for you, man.
All right, here we go. Now, this is a question from Foxboy Unknown. What is the most ridiculous call you had? We got a report that a gentleman was shooting something that appeared to be a gun from his balcony of his house. When responding to that call, this was not a SWAT call out, this was a normal patrol call out. But this gentleman was shooting squirrels with some sort of pellet or airsoft gun. But what made this so unusual is that he was on wine, but insisted that I stay for hors d'oeuvres and wine, not only during my service, but wanted me to return later on in the day to have a dinner date with him. And he was quite persistent about this. I will tell you, I did not show up, although I appreciated the offer. But it just was, the irony of it was this man never looked like he would ever hold a gun, nor was he successful at shooting the squirrels. But we did take a report. But he didn't get in trouble. Nice man.
You didn't give him your phone number?
Nah, I gave him yours.
Oh, so that's who Jerry is. Okay, gotcha, man. I gotcha.
Well, that's all the time we have for this episode of Interrogating with Cam and Israel. Mike, Levy, we really want to thank you for your time today. Thank you for your amazing answers and spending some time with us.
Absolutely, guys. It's always a pleasure. Great having you out. Hopefully see you in the near future.
And where can people find you online?
Webpage is assaultdynamics.com. I'm also on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok under Knockout Light, and go give me a visit.
We hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel so you can stay up on the latest and greatest from all things from Shiftfire. Get down in that comment section. Let us know some questions you want to hear featured on future episodes of Interrogating Cam and Izzy. And as always, Fire Team, stay sexy. We'll catch you on the next one. For those viewers, that don't know about you, why don't you explain a little bit about your background?
I do have a funny SWAT story, if I may.
Go for it.
But it might be a little bit.
Is it spicy?
It's kind of spicy, but it's funny.